There is a frequency that only opens after midnight. Most people spin right past it, a wall of static between the stations. But if you stop, if you hold there, sometimes a voice comes through. And some of those voices have been gone for a very long time. Welcome back to the midnight frequency. Turn the lights down. Put the world on hold. For the next few hours, it's just you, the dial, and the dark. What you're about to hear are the calls that came in on the nights nobody could explain. Ordinary people, on empty highways and in quiet houses, all reaching for the same phone to say the same thing. I've never told anyone this before. Some of these stories are strange. Some are sad. And a few of them still don't have an ending. So settle in. Keep the lights where they are. The lines are open. And tonight, it seems, the dead still have something to say. Let's begin. The hum of the radio static is thick like fog. I am sitting in the dark, in an old house that feels both familiar and somehow off. It's 3 a.m., and I'm alone with my thoughts. The fireplace crackles softly, its warmth the only comfort, but the logs have long since gone cold. My hand reaches out to the rotary phone on the antique stand beside me. Its keys are rusted almost to the point of being unusable. I hear a distant siren, echoing through the empty streets outside. It makes my skin prickle with unease. Why is it always this time? I try not to think about why the call never disconnects. Hello, my voice echoes slightly in the silent room. Is anyone out there? The static hisses again. A whisper that could be anything, electricity sputtering or something else entirely. The phone feels too cold, and my fingers linger on its surface as if it holds some unseen power. I dial the number for the late night radio show, hoping to reach someone who understands. As the line connects with a familiar static crackle, a voice begins to speak, slow and calm. It sounds like midnight, like the world has paused. Good evening. This is Midnight Frequency. We're here for you. If there's something in your life that needs to be told. I take a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My name is Mike. I'm from Galveston. The words sound hollow, as if I've been speaking into an empty room. The host doesn't prompt further. The air feels heavy with the weight of his silence. Mike, can you describe where you are? I look around the dimly lit house, which feels both ancient and strangely modern at once. It's just me, in my old family home. It was built in 1920, but it's been mostly empty for years now. I've been staying here since last night. There is a pause, as if the host is processing what he's hearing. Mike, do you remember why exactly the house is so empty? I shrug, even though it can't be seen in this dark room. They say something weird happened there 20 years ago. A fire. It was supposed to have been accidental, but people were talking. A soft snicker comes through the static, like a ghost whispering your name. I swallow hard. Can you tell us more about what led up to that night? The host's voice is calm, but there's an edge to it now. I start to tell him the story of my childhood. The family gatherings that were always filled with laughter and warmth until the day everything changed. We had a big party at the house for Thanksgiving. Everyone was talking and having fun. But then, I remember going outside with my father. He said he saw something in the sky, some lights moving around. A few minutes later, this strange noise started coming from inside. The static crackles again, louder now, as if someone else is on the line trying to get through. Tell me about it, the host urges gently. I take a deep breath. It sounded like thunder, but different. It kept getting closer and then farther away. I told my dad, let's go back inside. But when we got there, everything was already going up in flames. The walls were smoking, the whole house filling with smoke. A low, haunting moan comes through the line now, clear as if someone is just a few feet away. Did you see who set it on fire? The host asks quietly. I shake my head, even though the host can't see me. No one was there, but when we were trying to get out, I saw this figure. The voice cuts off abruptly, as if someone had hung up. The static becomes a white noise roar that threatens to consume everything else. My heart races in my chest. Mike, Are you still there? I nod to myself, even though no one can see me. Yeah, I'm here. I whisper into the phone, though it feels as if there's nothing but a black hole in its place now. The house around me is colder than ever, and the cold seems to seep through my bones. The line disconnects with a sharp click, leaving only silence. I sit in the dark, listening for something that isn't there. Something familiar and yet utterly unfamiliar. In this old, empty house, I can still hear the distant siren wailing. It sounds like a warning, like someone, or something is trying to get out. The phone rings again, but before I can answer, the door creaks open slowly. At 3:45 a.m. on a crisp autumn evening in Ashland, Ohio, Sarah settled into her tiny apartment with a cup of hot coffee. Her job at the local factory required midnight shifts, and lately, the silence had become so profound that it felt almost eerie. The old house was built in the early 1900s, its walls thick and whispery in the dead of night. Sarah's night shift began on time, and as she started her usual routine, checking machinery, filling orders, her phone rang. Startled but not immediately concerned, Sarah picked up the receiver. It was a standard issue telephone with a corded handset. It had once been connected to her small kitchen, which now lay empty, gutted from its previous life. "Hello," she said, her voice steady despite the strange occurrence. Static crackled through the receiver, like a distant storm gathering strength on the edge of consciousness. Sarah's brow furrowed as the static intensified. A harsh hiss that seemed to whisper incoherent words just beyond audible range. She hung up and stared at the phone, fingers hovering over it warily. Later, during her lunch break, Sarah noticed something peculiar about the kitchen. The walls were bare now, exposed studs and wood paneling showing through where the old kitchen appliances had once stood. Yet, on the floor near the wall, an old-style rotary telephone remained, a relic from a bygone era. She hadn't realized it was still there. The phone rang again at 4:15 a.m. This time, Sarah didn't reach for the receiver. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a cell phone instead. Curious but wary, she left the rotary phone untouched. It rang once more, a single prolonged ring, as if to demand attention. With trembling fingers, Sarah brought the old telephone up to her ear. This time, no static greeted her. Instead, a low, male voice whispered, "Sarah." She hung up quickly and turned off the lights, wrapping herself in blankets. Outside, the moon shone through the windows, casting pale shadows across her walls. The kitchen seemed eerily empty, as if every inch of space was listening. Days passed with no further calls, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of something unseen. Every evening, she checked on the rotary phone, its presence a constant reminder that whatever had called might strike again. Weeks turned into months. Sarah moved from her night shift to day work, but the old kitchen remained unchanged, except for a single, unsettling detail. The phone line was still connected to the wall. No matter how many times she disconnected it, someone or something found a way to reconnect it. One night, as she lay awake, Sarah heard the faintest sound, a soft scraping against the drywall near the old kitchen. The noise stopped abruptly. She sat up in bed and listened intently, but all was still. Sarah dismissed herself for being paranoid. After all, what could be living inside her walls? The phone rang again at 3:17 a.m. on a particularly cold night. Without hesitation this time, Sarah reached for it. As she brought the handset to her ear, she heard his voice again. "Sarah." This time, he didn't just say her name. There was an urgency in his tone that made her blood run cold. "Please," the voice whispered urgently. "Find me." She hung up. The line went dead. But Sarah knew something wasn't right. As she lay back down, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from within the walls. A faint tapping sound echoed softly in the night, and for a moment, she believed it was her imagination playing tricks. Now, as dawn approached, the silence was oppressive. Sarah sat up, staring at the old rotary phone with an unease that settled deep in her bones. She knew something was wrong, Something that had been calling from inside the walls of her home, something that hadn't simply left to rest. At 3 a.m., the world was draped in shadows. The streets of Beatrice, Nebraska were empty. Only the hum of distant highways broke the silence. For most of us, this would be a serene moment, perhaps filled with dreams or the gentle ticking of clocks. But for Jack Harper, it was another night on his long journey. Jack had been a trucker for over 20 years, but the recent stretch from Beatrice to Colorado seemed more sinister than usual. The endless rows of cornfields stretched out like a vast green sea, their stalks rustling softly in the evening breeze. Tonight, as he cruised down this desolate road, an unbidden chill crept up his spine. "Can't believe I'm still awake at this hour," Jack muttered to himself. His voice was a whisper against the static hissing from the radio. He switched off the talk show and set it to a smooth jazz station, hoping for some soothing melodies. The road ahead seemed almost taunting in its emptiness. Jack's headlights illuminated the dark green patches of corn taller than his truck's cab. It would take at least another half hour before he reached his next stop, a small town where he could stretch his legs and perhaps grab a cup of coffee. That was when it began. A peculiar disturbance. First just a flicker in his peripheral vision, then a slight pressure on the steering wheel as if someone were pushing him to slow down. Jack blinked, but there was nothing out there, just the endless expanse of cornrows. A few minutes later, he saw something that turned his blood cold. A figure had appeared at the edge of the field, waving its arms in the distance. Jack's heart raced as he adjusted the truck's mirrors to catch a better look. The figure was unmistakable, a human form against the dark stalks. But it wasn't the stranger on the road. It seemed to be coming from the cornfield itself. Jack swerved his gaze back to the road, but when he turned around again, the figure had moved closer. Now, its arms were moving more urgently as if trying to get through the barrier between them. His mind raced with possibilities. Someone lost in the night, a prankster, but the unease remained, gnawing at him from within. The phone inside his truck rang, startling him. It was a long-distance call he hadn't expected. No one knew he would be driving this route tonight. "Hello." Jack's voice was steady as the figure in the cornfield continued to wave frantically. "Jack, you're not going to believe this, but I just saw that man waving from the same field. It's like it's following you." The line went dead, leaving an eerie silence between them. Jack glanced at his phone, then back at the road. The figure was now even closer, its arms rising and falling in a desperate plea for understanding. As he drove on, the waves grew more insistent, as if the unseen man were trying to communicate through this strange manifestation. Each wave seemed to push him towards the field where no one else dared venture. By the time Jack pulled into the gas station in Beatrice, the figure had vanished, but the memory lingered. The phone rang again, and he answered it just as the cashier was giving him his receipt. "Hello." His voice was tinged with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Jack, are you still there?" There was no reply from the line, just static. A chill swept through Jack, not just from the cold night air but from that unexplained whisper in the cornfield. He stepped out of the truck into the dark, the sound of crickets mingling with his ragged breathing. The road ahead remained empty, the field silent except for the distant hum of the truck's engine. Jack turned back to his vehicle, feeling a presence watching him from the shadows. "See you soon," he muttered, though no one heard but the cornfield that seemed to have its own stories to tell. The night air was crisp and heavy with the scent of salt spray, carrying whispers from the sea. I pulled my coat tighter around me as I walked down the empty street to Salem's older side. The old houses here wore their age like a cloak, whispering tales under the light of the full moon. I was just 33, a father to 2 kids, and a man who'd seen his fair share of New England's autumn weather, but tonight felt different. My son was home from college for a visit, and he had talked about an old house down the street where he'd heard strange noises while staying over at a friend's place. When I arrived, the front door stood open, inviting me into the quiet. The house was in shadow, its paint peeling like years of secrets accumulated on its walls. The air smelled faintly of mustiness and something else, a scent that tugged at the back of my mind. I shivered as I crossed the threshold. The living room was dimly lit by an old chandelier whose bulbs were flickering erratically, casting long shadows across the carpet. My son, Jack, sat in front of the fireplace, his laptop open and a mug of hot chocolate beside him. He looked up from it with a start when I entered, the light catching something in his eyes. "Dad, you scared me," he said, looking around as if expecting someone to appear behind me. "Just came home early today," I explained. "How's work?" He waved a hand dismissively. "Fine." His tone was strange. It sounded like he was trying too hard to be casual. I noticed the basement door standing open slightly. The old wooden steps creaked under my weight as I descended, and the air grew colder with each step down. Jack trailed behind me, following the trail of shadow between us into the darkness. The basement had once been an addition, a guest room perhaps, but now it was filled with dusty trunks and boxes. A few flickering lights hung from bare wires, casting eerie shadows across old carpet that seemed to have seen better days. My son stopped at one corner where an ancient reel-to-reel tape recorder sat against the wall. "What's this?" he asked, nodding toward the machine. I walked over to it and found a box of tapes. The cardboard was yellowed, with names scrawled in faded ink. "Grandpa, Auntie June." I picked up one, feeling its cold weight as my son watched from nearby. Suddenly, something brushed against my leg, a ghostly chill that made me pull back the blanket I'd brought along. "Jack, you scared me," I said through clenched teeth. He looked apologetic and started to reach for a tape. As his fingers touched the box, there was a faint humming from inside the machine. "Strange," he muttered. His hand lingered on the lid as if about to open it, but then his expression changed. "Turn that on, Dad," Jack said, his voice almost imperceptibly different, deeper and oddly urgent. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the chill again, but I clicked the tape recorder on. There was a pause, just a heartbeat of silence before the machine began to spool out voices from long ago. The first few seconds were indistinct. Then, they became clearer, distinct, almost as if someone was whispering from another world. It sounded like my own voice, but it wasn't mine or anyone else's in the room. "Where are you? What is that sound? Is anyone home?" The voices grew louder, more insistent until I recognized them. My son's and mine. I looked at Jack, who was staring at me with wide eyes, as if waiting for an answer that wouldn't come. My hands were shaking now. The tape kept going, but we couldn't figure out how to stop it. The voices morphed into a chorus of questions, then words, disjointed and urgent. "Where is he?" Jack's voice rose in panic. "We're trapped." I tried to grab the machine, but it slipped from my fingers as if it were alive. I heard my own breathlessness, my son's fear. "Someone's here," I whispered, my heart pounding. The tape continued to play, voices overlapping, a strange kind of conversation that made no sense but rang with an unmistakable truth. When the last sound faded away, we were in complete silence, surrounded by darkness and old furniture. Jack looked at me, his face pale. "I can't explain what just happened," he said quietly, "but I'm scared." My mind raced as the tape fell silent. The machine stopped on its own, but no one was here, or so it seemed. We stood there in the cold basement, shivering and unsure of how to deal with the unspoken truths that now lay between us. And then the phone rang. "Don't touch that dial. Stay with me. The next one is worse." It is around 3 in the morning, and the radio static crackles like old bones. The needle of the dial is stuck, as if it's searching for a song that isn't meant to play at this hour. I'm driving through Barstow, California, a town not much bigger than a ghost story itself, heading home after an endless night shift. My passenger is a girl I'll call Melissa. She is huddled in the corner of the cab, her body small and vulnerable despite the downpour outside. Her rain-soaked clothes cling to her. Her hair hangs in limp waves against the window. But it's her eyes that hold you. The cold, unflinching gaze as if she's staring at something far beyond me. "Can I go to the graveyard?" she asks quietly, without even turning to face me. Her voice is soft but steady, like a whisper in a room where only ghosts dwell. I nod slowly, not trusting my own voice. Sure, sweetie. Which one? The girl leans forward as if remembering something crucial. Grady Cemetery, she murmurs, her eyes distant. There's someone I need to see. Her words echo inside the cab. I pull over at the entrance of Grady Cemetery and switch off the engine. The gravel crunches under my tires like old bones grinding together in the darkness. The graveyard is eerily quiet, except for the occasional gust of wind rustling through dead leaves. There are no street lights here. The moon casts a pale sliver on the crypts. Melissa steps out of the cab with the same unyielding determination she carried inside it. Her hands move to her pockets as if feeling for something. A key perhaps? Or maybe the promise of her own name carved in stone. We walk between the rows of graves, each one more weathered than the last. I follow without question, like a shadow trying not to appear too dark or real. Suddenly, Melissa stops at an old headstone. It's chipped and worn away from years of neglect but still legible enough to read. Grady Jones. She turns towards me. Her eyes alight with something both desperate and serene. Is it here, she asks in a voice that doesn't belong on this forsaken earth. I look at the grave, then back to the girl. Yes, I say simply. It is. For a moment, there's only the sound of our breathing and the distant bark of a dog. Then, without warning, the ground under us rumbles like a thunderstorm underground. The headstone splits in half along its seam, revealing not just dirt but something more, something that shouldn't be here. I take a step back, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped drum. Melissa, I say softly, what is this? The girl steps forward, her hand reaching out to touch the cold stone. She laughs then, an eerie sound that makes me shiver in the chill of the night air. Grady never meant it to end like this, she says, her voice tinged with a sadness I can almost taste. He wanted us to find each other, just like he knew we would. With those words, she disappears into thin air, leaving behind nothing but the split headstone and my own terrified realization that maybe, just maybe, there are some things in this world that should stay hidden. The static grows louder on the radio until it drowns out even the echo of her name. The static crackled in the background like a whisper from another world. It was 3:30 in the morning, and I should have been sound asleep, but my old cabin on Pine Ridge was never completely dark. The radio hummed with an odd energy that cut through the quiet. And he turned off the lights. That's when it happened. A soft voice filled the room, so familiar yet not mine at all. It sounded like someone who had been listening to the same show for decades, and knew every word by heart. And he went into the kitchen. The voice paused for just a second longer than usual before continuing, and there was nothing but silence in the dark. I sat up straighter, my eyes darting towards the radio. It was an old Marconi model, still on its dusty pedestal where I'd placed it years ago. Why it had never worked until now. I shook off the thought. The voice didn't belong to me. There's nothing wrong with a little imagination. But then came another whisper, more words, and they were different this time. And he checked the freezer for leftover meat. I blinked. How could it know about my half-eaten steak from last night? My skin crawled despite the chill of the room, and he turned on the lights, but there was nothing to see. The voice dropped to a near mutter. No one there at all. No one at all. My hands gripped the radio tighter, the edges biting into my fingers. I couldn't hear anything else from the kitchen, not even the hum of the refrigerator. Then, almost as if it had been waiting for this moment, and he went back to his room and got into bed. My breath hitched as another voice joined in, quieter but still distinct. And just like that, everything was quiet. The silence in the cabin stretched on, holding me captive with its eerie weight. I stared at the radio, wondering if maybe it had always been on, just out of range until now, but there was no signal tower nearby to cause interference. And he fell asleep. Then, a final whisper, only to be woken by his own voice telling him what happened. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The radio seemed to shift and glow with an inner light, as if it were alive. I looked down at the dial. No signal there either. Why was this happening? Another quiet word. Because he had always been the one listening. The voice faded away, leaving nothing but static. But I knew that wasn't all. The cabin seemed to grow colder, the air thick with an unspoken memory. I reached for the phone, trying to dial out into the night, but my call was met only by the echo of my own breathing and the faint hum of the radio. In the darkness, it whispered a single sentence. Comma, and he will always be listening. The night air was crisp and thick with the scent of pine. I sat in my kitchen, sipping a cup of cold tea that had long ago lost its heat. Outside, the first snow of last winter's chill clung to every visible surface, transforming Duluth into a quiet, spectral landscape under an iron-gray sky. As the hours rolled by, I began to notice something peculiar. Just after midnight, when my usual nighttime silence was finally settling in, I would hear it. Soft shuffling noises coming from the direction of our old neighbor's house across the street. At first, I thought it might be one of the early birds who work the night shift or maybe an animal. But then came the sound of a shovel scraping against concrete. And it wasn't just any shovel. It was the one my late neighbor Harold had used to clear snow off our driveways in summers past. Each scrape echoed through the empty streets, growing louder as if someone was approaching and retreating, repeating the action over and over. Harold's still out there, I mused aloud. My voice cracked slightly, betraying my surprise at hearing his name after so many months. I reached for the phone, intending to check on him, but hesitated when I remembered he had passed away during that brutal winter storm. A chill ran down my spine as if Harold himself was brushing against me. Deciding to ignore it, I tried to settle back into bed, but the shoveling persisted, incessantly, even through the night. My sleep was interrupted by vivid dreams of icy driveways and bare trees, their branches twisted like skeletal fingers grasping for warmth. When I awoke in the early hours, I found my own driveway untouched, still buried under an inch or so of snow. That first night wasn't enough. It was just the start of something unwelcome. The next midnight, I sat on the living room couch, a blanket wrapped around me despite the relative warmth of our cozy house. The only sound came from the television muted to low volume, its red LED screen casting a faint glow across the room. Again, at precisely midnight, the same scraping noise began. This time, it seemed closer than before. A shadow moved against my curtains, and for an instant, I imagined it was Harold's silhouette, his figure from years past, now somehow reborn under this eerie cold. I reached for my phone, intent on reporting this oddity, but then the thought struck me. Why am I surprised? Surely he can't be back. It's just a figment of my imagination still. The sound continued, and something about it had grown more frantic, less human. Almost as if whoever, or whatever was shoveling was under great pressure. In the moments that followed, the scratching grew louder, sharper, until there seemed to be multiple voices at once. The static crackling of my phone interrupted my thoughts, and I grabbed for it blindly in the dark. 1 2 3 4 5, I whispered, pressing numbers quickly. After several failed attempts, finally, a sleepy voice answered. This is the Midnight Frequency. What can we help you with? No one's here but me, I said, my words laced with uncertainty and fear. Is the line still open? I heard a sound outside. You know, maybe from the neighbor who died last winter, shoveling the driveway. There was a moment of silence on the other end before the host replied calmly. I hear it too, just like you do every night. This is not unique to you. Others have shared similar experiences over the years. But for now, we'll keep listening together. The line went dead, and I was left alone with my thoughts and the persistent shoveling noises. Night had fallen again in Duluth. But it wasn't just the dark that gripped me. I felt something watching from the shadows, waiting. Midnight struck once more, and the scraping began anew. The static hissed over the radio like old paper crackling in a fire. The midnight host's voice drifted from the speakers, its deep timbre barely hiding the weariness of having listened to too many calls. Good evening. This is the Midnight Frequency. he intoned calmly. For those who are awake at 2:34 a.m., with nothing better to do than listen to stories that go bump in the night. The host paused for a moment, allowing the tension of the quiet to build. I just received a call from an ordinary man, a stranger who had one hell of a strange story to share. The caller introduced himself as Frank, and he hails from the quiet town of Tucumcari, New Mexico. Frank cleared his throat into the microphone, his voice tinged with both embarrassment and a lingering fear. I was driving through Tucumcari on my way home late one night, he began. His words were hesitant, like someone reliving a nightmare for the first time. I had made reservations at a small motel called the Rusty Anchor. It's an old place, not much to look at, but they said there'd be rooms with 2 queen beds. It was well past my bedtime, 2:05 a.m., and I was ready for some much needed sleep after driving all day. Frank paused, his voice trailing off as if he could still hear the echoes of his story. But something about that motel room just didn't feel right. It was cold, an unseasonable chill even though it was only late autumn. And there was this static on the phone line, like the radio itself might break down any second. The host nodded along silently as he continued with Frank's tale. Once settled in my room, I found myself staring at the room's inventory list: 2 queen beds. That much was clear. I felt a shiver run through me, and then there it was, a single extra sheet and pillow on one of the walls, draped over what looked like an unused bed frame. Frank's voice became almost a whisper now. I didn't want to believe my eyes, but there it was, unmistakably in place where no bed had been listed. I lay down on one side, trying not to think too much about it as I drifted off to sleep. Told myself the sheet and pillow must be for a previous guest who hadn't cleared out properly. He hesitated before continuing. Later that night, around 3:15 a.m., I woke up suddenly with an odd sense of presence. I lay still for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. Then I heard the door creak open slowly, so softly I almost didn't notice it. And there he was, in that extra bed, facing away from me, breathing heavily as if he hadn't slept at all. The host's voice grew quiet and solemn. I listened, transfixed, not wanting to make a sound. Frank said the man in the extra bed remained like that for several minutes before finally standing up slowly and shutting the door behind him. The room was empty again, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. He had been there, real as could be. Frank's voice cracked slightly with emotion. I waited until dawn to report it to the manager, explaining everything. She said there must have been a mix-up in their records and that she'd look into it. But when I returned later on the same day to settle my bill, the room was listed as empty, no extra beds or sheets mentioned anywhere. The host's voice echoed over the airwaves with a sense of finality. Frank left Tucumcari that morning feeling unsettled, but his story lingered in our minds long after he hung up. As he packed to leave, the thought haunted him. What was in that motel room? Was it just an old bed, or something more sinister? The host paused for a moment, allowing the airwaves to hum with unspoken thoughts. So there you have it, a tale of mystery and the night's uncertainty, shared under the cover of darkness on the Midnight Frequency. There was a momentary silence before the host spoke again, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of what had been shared. Until next time, stay safe, and listen closely in the quiet hours. You're listening to the Midnight Frequency. Keep the lights where they are. The night is dark and still in the small Utah town of Provo. The air carries the faint scent of pine from nearby trees, and there's that quiet hum of distant city lights. The house on Maple Street is cozy and tidy, with lights off except for a single bulb in the baby's room upstairs. Inside, Sarah sits by the kitchen table, her fingers drumming softly against the cool surface as she contemplates the world outside. Her husband, Mike, has gone to work his night shift at the hospital, leaving her alone. The baby monitor hums gently beside her, a small screen with a staticky image of little Emma's sleeping face. Sarah can hear her daughter breathing steadily through the crackling white noise. It's been this way for days. Emma asleep, and everything calm on the other end. But tonight is different. There's an odd chill in the air. Suddenly, The sound changes. A soft whispering begins, barely audible but unmistakable. It starts as just a murmur, almost like wind through the leaves, but then it grows into something more slow, drawn out syllables that don't quite form words. Sarah's heart skips a beat as she leans closer to the monitor. It's, "Oh dearie, you're such a good baby." The voice is old and cracked, as if from someone very, very far away. It doesn't match anything on the screen. The image of Emma remains unchanged. The whisper continues. Softer now, almost a song. "Sleep my little darling, don't be afraid." Sarah's eyes widen, but she doesn't dare move or speak. She knows she should alert Mike or call 911, but something stops her. Maybe it's the familiarity of the voice, or perhaps just an overwhelming sense that this isn't real. Whatever it is, she stays put, listening intently. The whisper turns into a full melody, an eerie lullaby with notes that seem to hang in the air. Sarah can almost see her grandmother's face, young and happy, singing along with her voice. It's a memory, clear and vivid, of a bedtime song from years ago, except this version is different. The words are wrong, out of tune, and yet undeniably close. "I'm sorry to wake you, but I couldn't leave without saying." The line breaks as the voice trails off into silence. Sarah swallows hard, her breath catching in her throat. She reaches for a cup of water on the counter, fingers trembling slightly. The monitor stays silent now, just the faint static of the baby's breathing. She stands up slowly and walks to Emma's room. The door creaks softly as she pulls it open. Inside, everything is still, no signs of intrusion or disturbance. Emma lies sound asleep in her crib, no one else around. Sarah takes a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. She checks the batteries in the monitor, still full. The only thing missing is something that's hard to articulate. There's a presence here, an entity that can't be measured or explained away by simple hardware failure. As she backs out of the room, her phone buzzes with a missed call from Mike, already back home from his shift. She answers, but he doesn't say anything on the other end. The line is silent except for the static of the baby monitor, now eerily normal again. Sarah looks at it with distrust, as if expecting to see the ghostly image flicker back to life. She knows she should turn everything off and go to bed, but her feet won't move. Instead, she stands there in the hallway, holding the phone. The only sound is the gentle hiss of the monitor and the soft breathing of her sleeping daughter. Sarah wonders if anyone else will hear this story, or whatever it is, before a cold dread settles in her chest. She finally turns off the baby monitor, leaving the room behind, but not the voice that haunts her now. It is just after midnight in Ely, Minnesota. The night sky is painted with stars, and the only sound is the distant hoot of an owl. Jack Jensen steps out of his cozy cabin, boots crunching on the snow-covered driveway. He pulls on a thick woolen sweater and steps into the crisp, cold air. Tonight, he's hunting a large buck that has been eluding him for weeks. Jack owns a small lodge on the outskirts of town, offering deer hunting packages to visitors from the city. His cabin is tucked deep in the woods, surrounded by tall pines and thick underbrush. The snow blankets the ground, creating a white silence that muffles the world around him. He steps onto his porch, feels the chill seeping through his boots, and picks up the flashlight hanging beside the door. He jabs the beam into the darkness and begins to walk slowly, methodically, following one of his own tracks. Last night, he had seen a flash in the woods but couldn't make out what it was. Tonight, he hopes to catch better sight. Jack's breath forms tiny clouds as he walks deeper into the woods. The air is still, and only the sound of twigs snapping beneath his boots disturbs the quiet. He passes a series of wide tracks leading off to the left, unmistakably his own. But then, something shifts in his peripheral vision. He turns slightly, squinting against the bright beam. Ahead, just as he had walked them moments ago, are two sets of prints, identical boot prints side by side, leading further into the woods. Jack's flashlight trembles in his hand. His heart races. It's impossible. These tracks have never been here before. He walks slowly towards the mysterious second set of prints. Each step feels heavy, each breath ragged. He follows them down a narrow path he doesn't remember noticing. The air is getting colder as he gets deeper into the woods, and the silence grows oppressive. Finally, at the edge of the clearing, Jack sees where the tracks disappear into a spot where the snow has been recently disturbed. But the prints continue beyond that point, into a darker, more shadowy part of the forest. He steps cautiously towards this area, heart pounding in his chest. The air is thick with tension. Jack reaches the edge of the clearing and stops, feeling a sudden coldness seep through his clothes. The second set of boot prints leads him deeper, even as the first set fades away. With each step, he feels more alone, more lost. Jack's flashlight casts a flickering beam ahead, revealing nothing but darkness. He hesitates, looking back at where he came from, before taking another halting step forward. The prints led down a slope, towards an old stone wall that was once part of a forgotten cabin. Jack can feel the chill of the night pressing in on him. He reaches the base of the slope and stops suddenly, feeling as though he's been hit by something unseen. The flashlight beam illuminates nothing but darkness, except for a faint, ghostly light emanating from behind the wall. It's as if someone, or something, has been there before him. Jack stands frozen, staring at the stone wall. He can't understand why these tracks are here, or who would be following his own footsteps into the woods at this hour. The silence is deafening, and the cold seeps through his bones. He steps back, shaking his head to clear it, but the second set of prints still stare at him from behind the wall. They look almost accusatory, as if daring him to keep going. Jack swallows hard, feeling a tightening in his throat. He knows he shouldn't, can't continue on, yet his feet move forward anyway. The flashlight beam bounces off the stone wall and onto the ground where the tracks end. There is nothing more, just darkness, pure, unbroken darkness. Jack stands there for what feels like an eternity, surrounded by the stillness of the night. He knows he should turn around, get back to his cabin, but something compels him to walk towards the unknown. As he steps forward, a single whisper reaches his ears, a faint echo of a voice calling out in the distance. It's as if someone, or something, is beckoning him deeper into the woods. Jack stops again, turning to face the direction of the sound. The only answer is silence. He takes one more step, feeling the tracks beneath his boots as he crosses the threshold of the unknown. The air grows colder, and a strange weight settles on him. He knows this is wrong, this is beyond reason, but he can't stop now, not when those prints are still leading him forward. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the second set of tracks vanish into nothingness. Jack stands alone in the woods, surrounded by an oppressive silence, the only sound his own ragged breathing. He knows what is out there, beyond the wall, but he cannot turn back. The darkness calls to him. Jack Jensen walks deeper into the forest, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, leaving nothing behind but more questions and an eerie sense of being followed. And in that silence, something watches. The quiet hum of my old car radio cut through the night. I was driving back to Flagstaff from Williams, Arizona, on what felt like one of those endless stretches of empty highway that stretch into the heart of the desert. The moon had gone behind some stubborn clouds, and the only light came from the occasional street lamps or the glow of passing cars. It was 2:08 a.m., and my shift at the diner was supposed to end in 10 minutes. I pulled over by an old payphone booth that looked like it hadn't seen a coin in decades. The phone booth had been a favorite haunt when I was younger, its location out of the way making it perfect for sneaking phone calls home. Back then, before cell phones became ubiquitous and everyone seemed to have constant access to everything, there was something oddly satisfying about leaving the world behind and calling just for a few minutes. It was those moments that I liked best, leaning against the booth as the chill of night bit into my skin, fingers drumming on the receiver as I dialed out of habit. The phone rang 4 times before the familiar sound of the receptionist's voice came through. Flagstaff payphone number 5362, she said. Hello, I replied, and the line went silent. Suddenly, the phone started ringing again, my own number from Flagstaff. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the booth. Heart pounding. Hadn't I hung up? Why was it ringing back? The static on the line grew louder, and I could make out muffled voices. "It's Sam," a voice whispered, faint but unmistakable. It sounded like a woman, too far away for me to be certain who she might be. "Sam," I echoed into the phone. The line went dead again, only to ring once more. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I pressed the receiver closer to my ear. "What do you want?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need your help," came a shaky reply, but it was definitely not Sam's voice. It was deep and gravelly, with an edge of urgency. "Someone's hurt." "Who are you?" A silence that felt like an eternity stretched out between us. Then the line went dead. I sat there in the booth for what seemed like hours, minutes, really, but it had become nightmarishly slow. The phone rang again and again, each time cutting me off before I could respond. I tried to think of a logical explanation, but logic wouldn't come. I wasn't hallucinating. This was real. There were no tricks involved, no elaborate setup. It just happened, like something from a nightmare that you can't escape no matter how hard you try. My phone beeped once, signaling the end of my shift at the diner. I should have hung up then and gone home, but the thought of going to sleep in my own bed with this ringing in my ears was more terrifying than staying here. I couldn't ignore it. Not now. I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, professional as she asked for an address or location. I could barely speak. "It's just the phone booth," I managed to choke out. The radio outside had gone silent, and the sound of my own voice seemed amplified by the empty night. "Stay where you are," the operator said firmly. Her tone didn't ease any of my fears. She sounded like she was used to this, but that only made it worse. The payphone rang again, cutting off mid-ring as if the line had been cut. But then, a faint whisper came through the receiver. "I'm coming." And with those words, everything went black. It was just another quiet Friday evening in Macon. The sky had already turned a deep purple, and the gentle hum of my old refrigerator seemed almost soothing after a long day at the factory. I had come back home earlier than usual, feeling the weight of an unsettled week on my shoulders. It was the first time in months that I hadn't felt like I'd need a night shift. Maybe it was because my husband, Carl, wasn't here to keep me company. I stepped out onto our little porch to get some fresh air and take a moment before diving into the nightly chores. The night was cool and still, no wind rustling through the old oak tree in the yard or the tin roofs of the houses across the street. It felt like the kind of evening that would stay still, unchanging. That's when I saw it, a faint light coming from the attic windows. At first, I thought maybe it was my imagination, a trick of the waning moon or the flicker of old power lines. But as I squinted harder, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, the light seemed to grow stronger. I had rarely been up there since Carl's death. The attic was our small retreat, a place where we would sit together on a creaky old bed, sharing stories and laughing over photographs from years gone by. But after he passed, it felt too heavy with memories of his laughter and the warm way he used to tuck me in. My heart pounded as I hurried up the narrow steps that led to our small attic. The floorboards groaned underfoot, reminding me of the old house's age. The air was thick, smelling faintly of dust and forgotten trinkets. As I approached the windows, the light was more than just a glow now, it was bright enough to read by. I turned on my flashlight, expecting to find some stray bulb that had blown out or maybe even Carl playing a prank on me from beyond until I saw the switch. It was barely visible but unmistakable, a bare attic light switch with the power cord still connected to it, though there should be no electricity up there at all. I pressed my hand against the cold metal of the switch, feeling the chill that seemed to emanate from the room. It hadn't been flicked on by a human hand. It had turned itself on, like some shadowy force was reaching out from the darkness and asserting its presence. I could hear the old house creaking as if in response, as if it was breathing alongside me, or perhaps just reminding me of how long this one light had been left off. I tried to reach for my phone, to dial Carl's number and find some explanation for this impossible occurrence, but something held me back. Perhaps it wasn't until that moment, standing in the dark attic with the inexplicable light on, that I truly felt his absence, not just as a memory or a shadow, but as a concrete force. The feeling was both cold and strange, like the chill of an icy hand brushing against my face, like a whisper in my ear. When I finally stepped back outside, the light in the attic had gone out, leaving only the darkness behind. But even now, years later, when the first light of dawn starts to bleed through my bedroom window each morning, I can still feel that chill on my skin. And as I step onto the porch, I often find myself looking up at our old oak tree, wondering if there's a ghostly hand pulling the attic switch every single night. It might just be me, but something tells me Carl isn't done with his little midnight games yet. This next call came in just after 3, the hour they say the veil is thinnest. The hum of the late night radio show faded slightly as the host settled into his chair. The date tonight was the 24th of October, and despite the falling leaves outside, the air inside the studio remained damply cold. His fingers drummed lightly on the microphone stand. He always did this when he was waiting for the call. "Thank you all for joining us on the Midnight Frequency," he began in his slow, soothing tone. "We have a chilling tale from Dodge City, Kansas tonight, shared by a caller who wishes to remain anonymous. It's a story of time itself seeming to play tricks. Or is it?" The static crackled as if the phone line had been shaken awake. "A couple days ago," began the voice on the other end, "I received an unusual call from my grandfather. He said he had a strange story for us, but wanted to do it his own way." "Sure thing, sir," replied the host. "We're here and waiting." The phone went dead for several moments before the caller continued. "I remember the story vividly, as if it happened yesterday. It's about my Uncle Roy, the farmhand on our family property near Stover Creek. He started working there when I was just a little boy. He was only in his early 20s then. You see, back then, we were a close-knit family living out in the countryside." A quiet, almost unsettling hum filled the air as the host processed this. "Tell us about Uncle Roy," he prompted. Uncle Roy had dark, wavy hair and kind eyes. He was always wearing an old leather jacket over his cowboy shirt, no matter the weather. I used to love going out there after school. There was just something peaceful about the farm, the smell of hay and wood smoke. Roy would teach me how to use tools, show me around the property. The caller paused a moment, as if trying to recollect his thoughts. "I still have some old photos, maybe 15 or 20 years old by now. There's one that shows us all, my parents and siblings, gathered in front of our house. And Uncle Roy is right there in between my mum and dad, standing in the shadows just a bit so much younger than he was even then. You can tell it's him because of his stance and the way his hand rests on my dad's shoulder, but he looks like he could be 10 or so years older. His face had these lines, almost as if he hadn't aged in decades." The host leaned forward slightly, intrigued by this strange turn. "Anyway, over time, Uncle Roy stayed with us. He started living closer to the farm in his own little shack out back. A real character, always joking around and playing pranks on my aunt or me. But then, one day when I was about 12, he just stopped showing up. My grandparents said they hadn't seen him for days. Eventually, they decided to check on him. There was a faint silence over the line before the caller continued. My grandpa called out to Roy's shack. This rickety little thing made of wood and metal sheets, surrounded by old machinery. There was no answer, so he went in, but it felt like someone had swept up all the air inside. There wasn't a breath left. He searched around but didn't find anything unusual until he stepped into this small closet just off Roy's bed. Inside, on that shelf where a hat should have been, was a faded photograph of my Uncle Roy, this one from when I was maybe 5 years old. He hadn't aged at all. A shiver crept up the host's spine, and he felt his teeth clench together. "And what happened after that?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "After they found him like that, Everyone started asking questions: why Roy looked so young when we knew his body was older? Why hadn't anyone noticed before? No one could give an answer. They tried to tell each other it wasn't real. It couldn't be true. But the photos in the house, some from before he got a job here, some that showed up afterward, didn't lie. Years went by, and Roy was never seen again, concluded the caller. Just like that, he was gone, and no one could explain where or why. The static crackled softly. I've wondered about it ever since. Do you think he's still out there somewhere, unchanged? Or have I just been tricked all these years by my own memories? The host swallowed hard, his voice now tinged with a hint of unease. We can only hope to find the answers in our dreams, he said softly into the microphone. Until then, we are left with questions that whisper through the night. The static crackled softly in my headphones as I dialed in. The station was late closing out their overnight show, and I had just called in with my story. The host's voice came through, steady and calm but oddly comforting after what happened tonight. Thank you for joining us on the Midnight Frequency, the host began. His tone was smooth, almost soothing. This is your host, and I'm listening to the stories that come from the most unsettling parts of your dreams, or so it seems. I cleared my throat. My name's Mike, and this happened last night around 3 a.m., just after midnight shift ended here at the oil refinery. The host paused for a moment. Mike, tell us what occurred on those lonely roads that kept looping at mile marker 9 in Wheeling, West Virginia. I took a deep breath. Okay, it was cold, and I had to pick up some extra hours during the weekend. Night shifts were supposed to be quiet but long, with time just running down like an hourglass inside your head. The host nodded along, his voice not betraying any emotion, but he did prompt me gently. You're alone on the highway, Mike. I remembered that moment vividly. The road was empty, only white lines guiding my way in the dark. Yeah, just me and my truck. I was driving the familiar route to drop off some heavy equipment at a warehouse. It's a long stretch, winding through old hills. I paused briefly as I closed my eyes, trying to capture that moment. Then something odd started. The map app on my phone kept showing us on a loop around mile marker 9. Not just a small drift or two but a full circle back where we left from. It was like the road folded in on itself. The host asked softly, "What did you do?" I recounted it with a shiver running down my spine. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe I just needed more coffee. But something didn't feel right. My heart raced as I saw us heading back to that same spot over and over again. Did you try calling anyone? The host asked. I did, I said, but no one picked up. It was like there was a wall of silence on both ends of the phone line. No sound but static. The car radio blared static for a moment before the host continued. That's unusual. Most trucks have some kind of signal. I nodded along, remembering the relentless sound. Yeah, and it was always supposed to be there. But that night nothing. Just nothing. Did you stop? He asked. Of course not, I replied with a hint of frustration. I had to get this equipment dropped off or face more questioning at work. The host's voice was now softer. You kept going, but something was wrong. I swallowed hard as the events replayed in my mind. Right about then, it got worse. The temperature started dropping. No warning. Just like that. My breath was visible, and the air felt heavier with each passing mile. The host's tone remained steady but his words carried weight. Tell us what happened next. I remembered the final stretch of the night. We made one more pass around that loop. Slower this time, but still circling. It was like being caught in some kind of gravitational pull, where I couldn't break free. The host's voice was now a mere whisper over the static. And then, as I recounted it, my voice began to echo with an eerie quality. I heard the sound again, like distant wails, muffled and distorted. They seemed so close, like they were in the cabin with me. I could swear I saw a shadow move across the rearview mirror. The host's response was quiet but resonant. And did you stop then? No, I said, my voice barely audible over the static. I kept driving, but I knew something. terrible was out there. The wails grew louder with every passing loop, and that cabin on the side looked like it had always been waiting. The host's tone remained steady. "You can't get off the road, Mike." "No," I replied, my voice filled with a mix of fear and determination. "It's just another stop on this endless loop." A silence settled in the air as the static continued to hum softly through my headphones. "Did you ever find out what was happening?" he asked finally. I shook my head as if talking to myself. "No, I never did." The host's voice drifted back, soft and calm. "Thanks for sharing that night with us, Mike. Stories like these are the reason we're here, listening, believing, and wondering, together." But the wails still lingered in the night air. As the radio signal faded into static, I sat there in my truck, surrounded by the cold, dark road stretching out before me. The loop at mile marker 9 continued to echo unanswered questions through the silence. The night was thick with mist as Sarah pulled her car into the dimly lit parking lot of St. Joseph's Hospital in Scranton, PA. The wind howled like distant wails through the old trees, and the only sound came from the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. She stepped out of her Jeep, feeling a chill that seemed to seep into every pore. Sarah had started working night shifts here a few months ago, and she was adjusting well until this strange new occurrence began. Sarah's shift was just beginning as she unlocked the door to room 518. The nurse's station buzzed with familiar activity, but an odd silence hung in the air. She made her way through the familiar corridors, each step echoing softly against the linoleum floors. Room 518 was a small space, with its single bed and the old monitor standing by the window that looked out onto the parking lot. The room had been empty since an accident last month, a fire that took everything but a few charred personal items. But tonight, something felt different. Sarah frowned as she approached room 518. The door was slightly ajar, just enough to catch a whiff of antiseptic and stale air inside. She hesitated for a moment before pushing it open, the sound muffled by an almost imperceptible click from the old doorknob. Inside, the bed was unmade, sheets rumpled like something left long ago. Sarah walked over to the small monitor on the wall near the window. There, on the screen, was a patient file, but no one had been assigned to this room since the fire. She frowned, squinting at the numbers. The vital signs were logged: heart rate of 72, respiratory rate of 16, and blood pressure stable. Sarah's hands began to tremble slightly. She snapped out of her reverie when she heard a soft beeping from inside an old filing cabinet. Her heart raced as she approached it slowly. Inside, she found another file labeled RM. Same vitals. Same room 518. The timestamp was recent. The monitor had just updated. "Is this some kind of mistake?" Sarah whispered to herself, her fingers fidgeting with a pen that lay near the files on top of an empty desk. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her from the shadows. She tried calling down to the nurse's station but got no response. The silence stretched on as she waited for another update on RM's vitals, only the static in her headset providing a faint hum of life. Sarah turned off the monitor and began gathering the files, planning to report this oddity immediately upon waking the night shift supervisor. But before she could leave room 518, something caught her eye near the door, a small patch of cold air that seemed to seep from between the frame and the wall, a chill that no heater in the room could explain. Sarah shivered and felt her grip on reality slip further as she heard a faint whisper, barely audible over the background noise. "I'm not alone." A sudden panic surged through Sarah as she tried to grasp at her sanity. She slammed shut the file cabinet, heart pounding, and raced down the hall, leaving behind the ghostly files of RM and room 518. But even before she reached the nurse's station, the silence was broken by a faint beeping coming from inside the room Sarah had just left. The beeper was followed by a soft whisper, this time clearly distinguishable. "Don't leave me here." Sarah paused, her steps halting in the darkened corridor. She turned back towards room 518, the chill growing as she approached. The door closed silently behind her with an ominous snap. "Good night, Sarah." It was a quiet Thursday night, around 10:30 p.m., and I was working my last hour as a maintenance man in the old brick mill outside Bangor. The town itself was draped in a shroud of darkness. Only a handful of streetlights flickered to life, casting deep shadows. The night shift hummed on, but with a kind of deadening drone that was almost mechanical. I had made it my routine at this hour to take the back stairs down from the third floor to the basement. The old mill echoed with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rattle of machinery or the scurrying of something small in the far reaches of a darkened room. Tonight, though, the sound was more present. As I reached the cellar door, it creaked softly on its hinges like it might at any moment drop and take me down with it. The mill's history was well known. Many had talked about strange happenings here, but I just treated them as old wives' tales. Tonight, though, I found myself hesitating before my hand reached the handle. "Knock, knock." I whispered to no one in particular, leaning against the cool stone wall and listening. The echo seemed longer than usual. Maybe a beat, maybe two, and when it faded, there was nothing but silence again. But then, from within the cellar, came what sounded like an answering knock. The door was still locked from above, so I couldn't believe my ears. Yet, there it was, a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to match the cadence of a heartbeat, or perhaps a drum. I closed my eyes and strained to hear it again, but this time there were two knocks, followed by another pause, as if the person on the other side was counting them out. I opened my eyes and looked around, feeling a shiver of unease. Could someone have been sneaking around? I dismissed the idea immediately. There was no one else in the mill for miles. I moved closer to the door and knocked again, more firmly this time. Knock, knock. And just as before, two knocks answered back. It wasn't much louder or clearer than the first time, but it was unmistakable. A chill ran down my spine, and I stepped away from the door for a moment, trying to clear my mind. The mill seemed to lean in on me with its oppressive walls. I returned and knocked once more, just to hear. The response came quickly this time. 3 knocks, then pause. 2 more. My heart was pounding now as I realized that whoever, or whatever, was doing this knew something about the patterns of knocking. Could it be a prankster playing on my fear, or was there more to it? I hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward and opening the door with an exaggerated flourish, ready for whatever lay beyond. The cellar was empty, dark, and silent, and yet, as I stepped inside, the floorboards whispered underfoot, as if mocking me. Slowly, I reached out a hand to the walls to steady myself. The air was cold, damp, and held the scent of age and secrets. As I turned to go, I heard it again, the knocking from within. It was faint now, but clearly audible, echoing against the thick brick walls. I leaned in closer, trying to pinpoint its source, but there was only silence when I listened directly. Knock, knock, I whispered, daring to hope that I might hear it one last time. It came back immediately, a steady rhythm of light taps against the darkness. With a growing sense of dread, I realized that no matter how many times I knocked or how long I stood in silence, the knocking never ceased. It was as if some unseen force knew my every move. I turned to leave, knowing that I should have left the cellar door open for the night, but instead it remained closed behind me, locked once more from above. The cold draft in the basement seemed to pick up speed as I walked back through the mill towards the stairs. At the top of the steps, I paused and listened. Nothing. The knocking stopped too, leaving only the faint hum of the night shift machinery. I turned the key in the lock of the cellar door with trembling fingers, feeling like a participant in some ancient rite that had just been broken. The door locked with a final click as if to seal away the darkness. But inside me, something remained unlocked, a nagging curiosity and an uneasy feeling that there was more to this than I could comprehend. As I walked out into the quiet night, the only sound was my own breathing, heavy and slow in the cool air. And then, just as I stepped outside, a soft knock came from within. If you're still with us, good. A lot of people stopped listening alone after this one. The night was crisp and clear as I sat at the dock of my cabin on the edge of Lake Crescent. The full moon hung low, casting an eerie silver glow over the still waters. My wife had long since drifted off to sleep in our cozy little home, but I was awake, staring into the distance. Tonight was the third night I'd pulled this small wooden boat out onto the lake, determined to cast my line and catch a record-sized salmon. I pushed away from the dock with a smooth sweep of the oars, easing the boat into the center of the lake. The water here is deep and unforgiving, its reputation well earned by those who call it home. The silence was thick. Only the occasional splash of a fish leaping out of the depths broke the heavy stillness. As I drifted along, my eyes wandered across the vast expanse of the lake, searching for signs of life. The moon's reflection on the water was as smooth and unmarred as glass. That's when it happened. The first glimpse of something out of place. A shadow, thin and black like a whip, arced through the water, just barely brushing the surface. It was long and narrow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it followed not only me but also the sun, as if this boat's path created its own light, or rather, darkness. I gripped my oars tighter, feeling the tension rise in my chest. Was this some trick of the mind, a remnant from a late night too many at the saloon, playing tricks on an exhausted fisherman's imagination? Yet as I watched, the shadow began to weave its way through the stillness with a strange, purposeful motion. It was there for only moments before it would vanish, leaving me staring into nothing but moonlight and water. I continued fishing, trying to keep my mind focused, but that nagging sense of something not quite right lingered. An hour passed, or so I thought, then another. My line remained untangled, untouched by the night's elusive bounty, but with each cast, I felt more and more aware of this unseen companion, skimming just beneath the waves. By the time my wife called out from the cabin, her voice muffled through the open door, something had shifted in the air. The quiet dread was palpable now, a weight pressing down on me as I rode toward home, trying to outrun whatever shadow lurked between us and the moon's silver light. As I pulled up my boat, I noticed the water around it shimmered with an odd iridescence, not quite mirage but almost. When I leaned in closer to scoop a sample, my hand brushed against something cold, a chill that ran straight through me, leaving behind a sensation so profound I couldn't shake it. I didn't return to bed that night, instead pacing the floor of our cabin with my hands clamped tight around an imaginary fishing rod. The moon was still high, casting its unyielding light across the room, and then, as I gazed out at Lake Crescent in the silent darkness, there appeared a second shadow cast by a single point of light. It's 3:04 a.m., the hour when shadows stretch and whisper softly in the corners of my room. I'm Tom, from Wichita, Kansas, and tonight, something just doesn't feel right. The phone rings, jolting me awake, but I don't answer. It's only 3 a.m., far too early for an ordinary call. I drift back to sleep, only to be awakened by the sound of the answering machine's beep, sudden and unwelcome. With a groan, I sit up and turn on the light. The room feels colder than usual, and I shiver, rubbing my arms. I press play, hoping for something mundane. The message plays slowly, like time itself is stretching out to mock me. Tom, are you there? It's my brother, Jack. Last night, he left early with his girlfriend, Sarah, promising a weekend getaway. She came home last night without him. I can still see her face, so pale and scared, as she explained everything. But the answer on the answering machine, Jack sounds like he was speaking from a grave distance. The message continues. Tom, are you there? Have you checked? His voice is desperate, echoing something ancient and urgent. It's been months since I've seen him. We lost touch after the accident. His last words were about this house on the hill, saying it was haunted. I can still hear him, as clear as if he stood just beyond my bedroom door. Tom. A chill runs down my spine. The machine clicks off, but the room feels heavier now, thicker with something not quite there. I realize Jack's voice has a strange undertone, slightly warped, like the message is being played backward. I pick up the phone and try to dial him back, but it goes straight to voicemail again. There's no signal tonight. The answering machine keeps beeping, taunting me with its silence. Jack was always a skeptic, a man who could scare himself silly with his own stories of the unexplained. But now I wonder if he knew something last night that he couldn't leave behind on the answering machine. Maybe he didn't mean to go away. He needed help. The room seems to close in around me as I try to make sense of this. I need to go check on him. But what if it's a trap? What if something is waiting for me? A soft scraping sound comes from outside my bedroom door, a noise that echoes the message. It's just my imagination, isn't it? Just a wayward draft in the night. But when I turn off the light and step into the hallway, the scratching grows louder. The floorboards creak underfoot, as if they are warning me to stay away from what lies beyond. I call out softly, "Jack," but there's no answer. Nothing moves. Nothing shifts. The only sound is the answering machine's incessant beep, mocking my fear and doubt. My heart races as I realize this wasn't a normal message. Wasn't Jack's voice at all somehow. He's left behind more than just a few words of goodbye. There are deeper secrets here, hidden in that old house, waiting to be uncovered. Or perhaps they've already been revealed. And with that thought, the answering machine's light flickers and dies. The silence that follows is absolute, except for my own ragged breathing. In the darkness, I can't shake the feeling that Jack was telling me something important, that he left this message so someone would find it, so they would listen to these cryptic words. "Tom, are you there?" The night was cold and quiet when I pulled up to my friend's old Victorian house. The paint chipped and peeling back, the windows fogged with age. It was 3 a.m. My friend had called from his phone booth, desperate for me to take over the weekly sit while he enjoyed a long weekend out of town. As usual, I wore old clothes, boots that creaked with each step, and a warm hoodie to stave off the drafty air of the century-old structure. The lights were mostly out. Only a single porch light flickered weakly, casting shadows across an otherwise shadowy landscape. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The house sat still, silent except for the occasional creak of floorboards underfoot or the distant howl of a stray dog. Inside, the air was damp and stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. My friend had given me the keys, and I carried them as if holding on to the remnants of his safety. The nursery was on the second floor, down 2 flights of creaky stairs. It was a cozy room, once filled with toys and cribs, now covered in dusty blankets. The walls were painted a sickly yellow, and a rocking chair stood against one corner, its frame sturdy but uninviting. My friend had told me it hadn't been used for years, locked up tight. I set my flashlight on the floor by the door and opened it, pushing past the smell of stale air and dampness. The chair was silent at first, just a simple, familiar object in an unfamiliar space. But as I stood there, studying the chair's dark outline under the dim light, something shifted. A faint sound, almost indiscernible, like a soft creaking. Probably just old, I whispered to myself, pushing aside the thought of ghosts and ghouls. I moved closer, my hand resting on the cold metal frame. The creak came again, louder this time, as if something was rocking back and forth inside. My heart quickened, but I tried to ignore it. I stepped forward, the chair now in my sight line. As I looked down, the room suddenly grew colder. The air seemed to thicken around me, heavy with unspoken words and unseen eyes. The rocking continued, steady and deliberate. My breath caught as a chilling draft came from nowhere, brushing past me with icy fingers. Maybe it's the wind, I thought, though my mind whispered otherwise. I reached for the door handle, but before I could turn it, the rocking stopped. An unnatural stillness replaced the chair's movements, like it had been abruptly halted by an unseen force. I stepped back and glanced around, searching for signs of movement or a shadow in the corner, but there was nothing, just the quiet house breathing around me. The door was still locked from the inside. How could that be? I shook my head, trying to push away the growing unease. As I turned to leave, the rocking started again, this time coming from deeper within the chair. It was too late to turn back now. Something demanded I sit down and see what it wanted. With a resigned sigh, I approached the chair and sat down. The moment my butt touched the seat, the rocking stopped. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as an unspoken agreement lingered between us. The room felt like a tomb, a shell of memories locked away with secrets buried deep within. The rocking ceased entirely, leaving only the sound of my breathing and the faint hum of old pipes in the walls. It was then that I noticed the door wasn't fully shut. A thin sliver of light showed from beneath it. I tried to stand up but found myself rooted to the seat by some unseen force. The room grew darker as I struggled, panic rising in my chest. The door's latch turned on its own, creaking open slowly. An unnatural calm settled over me as the door opened fully, revealing a darkened nursery beyond. And there, in the center of that darkness, sat the rocking chair, perfectly still. But something stirred within it, a small movement so subtle I almost missed it. A child's soft cry, like a whisper through a cold night. The room's silence stretched out, a heavy weight pressing down on me. The nursery's door slammed shut with a reverberating thud, locking us in. I reached for the phone that hung on the wall, my hand trembling as I fumbled to pick it up. But no matter how many times I tried, it was dead. "Someone help," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Please." The silence grew even more oppressive. The house sat still and empty, but I knew something was watching us. Something that had been locked away for years, now awake in the night. I am alone here, in this house, with a rocking chair that won't stop, and a nursery door that just slammed shut. And somewhere within, a child cries out into the cold, dark silence. It was 3:30 in the morning. The radio dial was already set at an odd spot, way out beyond the usual range of stations. The night was cold and still as the long-haul truck idled on a desolate stretch between Amarillo and Pecos. I glanced at my logbook, scribbled with the names of all the towns I'd passed through. Then I settled deeper into the driver's seat. The static hummed in a quiet way, faint whispers blending into a persistent buzz. I pulled out the cheap radio tucked between the seats and turned it off for a moment to clear my head. But when I flipped it back on, something odd caught my eye right away. The signal was weaker than any other frequency here, but there was an unmistakable voice, clear as day. I leaned closer, half expecting the broadcast to suddenly cut out. Instead, the voice began, "You're feeling a little tired tonight, aren't you?" It sounded like someone who knew me well. Or perhaps someone who could read minds. The words were soft and smooth, almost slurred. I sat there for a moment, staring at the radio with my heart pounding. "You've been driving all night," it said again, "and now you just want to pull over." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. How did this voice know about the truck stop that was coming up? We hadn't talked about where I wanted to go before. It paused for a second, as if waiting for me to speak. But I couldn't muster any words. Instead, it continued, "This isn't how you usually roll, Jason. You always drive through the night without stopping." I shivered. The voice had my name. It knew about the hours I'd spent awake on the road, fighting off drowsiness with coffee and cigarettes. But now, it was making a note of every detail of this particular night. "You're thinking about calling it quits for the evening," it said softly. "You might try to push through, but you know it's better not to." I swallowed hard, feeling an odd mix of fear and intrigue. It knew things I hadn't spoken out loud yet, about how much longer I could keep going, about what I hoped would happen at the next town. The voice faded into a whisper. "Maybe you'll find a new route tomorrow," it murmured. "Or maybe not." And then, just as quickly, everything went black. I sat there in silence for a long moment, trying to process what had happened. The static resumed its hum, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been different. That voice knew things about me that no one else could know. And now, it was gone. As I turned off the radio, my heart still racing, I drove on through the empty highway, listening for any sign of the ghostly voice, wondering if I would ever hear it again. Would it come back? Or had it just been a momentary glitch in an otherwise ordinary night? Don't touch that dial. Stay with me. The next one is worse. It's 2:15 a.m. and the highway is eerily quiet. The wind whispers past the windshield, carrying with it the chill of the desert night. I pull over on an exit road and wait for someone to hail my car. The headlights cut through the darkness as I check my rearview mirror, a habit that's become almost second nature since starting this job. The passenger side is empty. No one should be here yet. I've been working late shifts for weeks now, logging miles alone on these back roads where the only sign of life comes from the occasional truck barreling down the highway or the faint glow of casino signs flickering in the distance. I'm just another face among thousands who live and work under this vast, star-filled sky. The phone rings, and it's different from usual. It starts with a static, like the world is trying to make noise but can't quite get there. I pick up the mic, squinting against the light of the dashboard. The voice on the other end is small and tentative, not the confident tone you might expect. Can I use your phone? A shaky female voice asks through the hiss. I agree without hesitation. Sure thing, I say into the mic, reaching for my phone to give it to her while keeping an eye on the mirror. Just make sure you get out of the car when we're done. Okay. The static cuts in again, and there's a brief moment of silence. I start driving back onto the highway. It's still empty as far as I can see, but my passenger is quiet, so I let myself relax slightly. As I turn down an old, abandoned road to find a signal, I catch a glimpse of something odd in the rearview mirror, a figure in the passenger seat. Not there just now. At first, it's a blip, just a slight distortion. But as we drive further, the figure becomes more solid. It's a woman. She has long dark hair and is wearing a white coat, but her face is pale, almost too pale. Her eyes are wide, unblinking, and I catch them staring straight back at me. I swerve to the side of the road, nearly losing control in my surprise. Mom, where did you come from? I shout into the mic, but the static eats away at the clarity of my words. I can't make her out as she reaches for something on the floorboard with one hand. A sharp crackle fills the line, and when it fades, a new voice speaks. Don't look back, it whispers, barely audible over the radio's hiss. The passenger is gone from the mirror now, just an empty seat again. I pull over completely this time, my heart racing in my chest. I jump out of the car to check behind me but find nothing. The static has returned with renewed intensity. The only sound now is the hum of the engine and the rustling of leaves on the asphalt. The phone buzzes again. Another call. Can I please have your number? She asks in a voice that's eerily calm despite her earlier distress. Yeah, I say, trying to steady my hand as I jot down digits in the darkness. The next words she speaks are too soft for me to understand clearly, but they chill me to the bone. Remember this number. The call drops right after she hangs up, leaving only static and an uneasy silence. I sit in the car for a long while, listening to nothing except my own labored breathing. Then, without warning, the engine starts making a strange noise that sounds like it's coming from under the hood. My pulse quickens as I look down. There, between the grille and the body of the vehicle, is an open door handle, swinging back and forth in the breeze. A hand grips it tightly, the fingers elongated and pale. I leap out of the car without another thought. The only thing I can see clearly now is the passenger side mirror, reflecting the face of a woman staring straight at me with eyes that seem to burn through the glass. She blinks once, and then she's gone again, leaving behind nothing but the cold, empty seat. The phone buzzes one last time in my hand. The only sound in this desolate place where fear has made the darkness its own. I drop it as I run towards the nearest light of a gas station, my heart pounding wildly with each step. But when I turn to look back, all that's left is an empty road and a mirror that shows nothing but the dark expanse stretching out before me until, just as quickly, there's something there again. A woman in white, her eyes fixed on me, watching as if she never intended to leave. The quiet hum of the radio station cut through the night, the sound barely discernible over the hiss and pop of static. I was driving back from work in my old Ford F-150. A long shift at the local hospital leaving me exhausted but wide awake as I traversed the darkened streets of Boise. The late hour felt like it weighed heavily against the world outside the car window. Dim streetlights flickered along the highway, their glow barely piercing the shadowy night. The radio was tuned to the midnight frequency, a station where the airwaves crackled with stories of the unexplained. I flipped the knob for a final spin through our usual hosts before I turned it off and pulled into my driveway. But there on the dial, in an unexpected spot, sat something new, something I hadn't heard before, something that made me pause. The host's voice was deep and calm, as if he were speaking directly to me from inside the car. "Good evening," his voice said, clear yet distant. "This is your midnight frequency. You're free to call in any time you want to share a story. Sometimes, they might be simple. Other times, they could shake us to our cause." I leaned forward slightly, my fingers itching to reach for the phone. The caller line was open. The host continued, his tone unwavering. "I received a strange message this evening," he said. "A listener from Boise wanted to share something odd that happened in their new home. A story that might just leave us wondering long after midnight." Curiosity piqued. I fumbled with the phone and dialed. The call connected smoothly, the static on the line barely noticeable. "Hello," a voice asked through the crackle. "This is Sarah," I said into the receiver. "I heard you were open for stories tonight. Do you mind if I share something with you?" A moment of silence followed before the host spoke again. His voice was warm and inviting, an assurance that he would listen attentively to what I had to say. "I'm all ears, Sarah," he replied. "Please go ahead." I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself before speaking. "Well, it started with just a small wrongness, a subtle anomaly, really something I barely noticed at first," I began. "You see, my husband and I had recently moved into our dream home in the countryside outside Boise. A gorgeous, old Victorian that screamed history and charm. The backyard was lush, the architecture elegant, but it wasn't just that. The house had been newly renovated to modern tastes, with all of its original features preserved." I paused for a moment as I gathered my thoughts. The sound of crickets chirped softly in the distance, their melody interrupted by the occasional rumble from a passing freight train. "And then there was this one room," I continued, my voice dropping slightly. "This little storage space at the end of our basement. A cellar door that led to what appeared to be solid walls. It seemed like an odd addition to the house, as if it had been left there intentionally without any practical purpose." I hesitated again, thinking about how best to convey the strange feeling in my voice. It was during one late evening, right after we'd finished unpacking and settling into our new home, I said. There hadn't been a lot of time for us to properly explore it all that much, so one night, as I lay awake, I decided to take stock of the entire house. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly as I remembered. I went downstairs, down those old polished wooden stairs so familiar by now. They creaked under my feet, a gentle reminder of how long they'd been here. As I reached the bottom, though, something felt off. I said slowly, almost like there was more than just empty space beneath the cellar door leading to darkness. A shiver ran down my spine as if the very air had grown colder. I stepped forward, pushing gently on the door that hung silently from its hinges. To my surprise, it swung wide almost effortlessly, no creaking or groaning like I'd expected. And what greeted me next was a sight that left me feeling uneasy. I paused once more, allowing the memory to fully resurface. "You see, beyond those walls was not nothingness at all," I said softly. "There were stairs, going down into a space that our new home shouldn't have had. They seemed to stretch endlessly, leading deeper and deeper into the earth itself, dark, damp, and utterly unnerving." The host on the radio remained silent for a moment, his voice unwavering as he waited for me to continue. "And when I stepped down just a few steps, something odd happened. A faint, cold draft brushed past my cheek, almost imperceptible but not entirely so," I said, feeling the chill again even though I was in my warm car now. It felt like there was someone else with me. My voice grew quiet as I thought about what followed. I turned to go back up those stairs, but before I could fully make a turn, a phone rang. The sharp ring startled us both from the radio, and for just a moment, I wondered if it might be my own phone. But the host spoke again in his calm voice. Yes, he asked softly. And then I heard it, the sound of a woman's voice, clear but distant as though she were speaking through an old, worn-out speaker. Is this the midnight frequency? Can you hear me? I couldn't answer, trapped in the moment. The host didn't interject. He just listened, his tone neither shocked nor alarmed. The woman on the other line spoke again, her voice growing more urgent with each word. I know what I did wrong, she said hesitantly, but it was a mistake. I should have left everything as it was. Her words trailed off into an ominous silence that seemed to stretch on for minutes, though in reality, the moment passed quickly. The host didn't break his silence either, and then he asked finally. I was silent, my mind racing back through those few terrifying moments. I hung up, I said softly, but not before something odd happened. The host waited patiently as I tried to remember every detail. A brief static filled the line. I began. Then, just as it was clearing up, I heard it, a whisper. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Whispering something inaudibly, almost like a prayer. I felt a strange, cold sensation creep down my spine again. I didn't understand what it said. I continued. But the feeling of it, of someone unseen watching or perhaps even lingering nearby, it stayed with me long after we hung up. The host's voice broke through the silence once more, his calmness unwavering despite the unsettling nature of my story. Thank you for sharing that, he said softly. For those listening now, I think it's safe to say that sometimes, no matter how new or modern a home might seem, there are always secrets hidden in plain sight. He paused again before speaking once more, his voice almost as if he were. The night was quiet as Larry hung up the phone and stretched, his bones creaking. He looked around the dark kitchen of his old farmhouse in Lincoln, Nebraska. The walls were lined with shelves of jars filled with dried herbs and spices from his mother's garden. The only light came from a dim bulb over the sink. It was almost 11:30 p.m., and he should have been asleep long ago. Larry had heard about the KZMT radio contest on the way back home earlier that evening. It was a strange little segment, something that didn't quite fit with the station's usual lineup of music and late-night talk shows. The announcer had mentioned it as an experiment in audience engagement, something they would broadcast just this once on the 7th of November, at midnight. The rules were simple. Call in and leave a message about why you liked KZMT or its format, and the station would randomly select one winner to win a prize. But there was no way of knowing if your call was received. It was as if the idea itself was an afterthought, a whisper in between songs. Now here he was, staring at the phone on the kitchen table. He picked it up, flipped through his contacts, and found the number for KZMT. The dial tone hummed quietly in his ear before he hit send. He listened to the line for a few moments, hoping that there wasn't just static. And then came a buzz from within his pocket, a text message on his phone. It read, "Your call was received and recorded." Larry's heart skipped a beat as he sat down hard in the wooden chair. He felt something small and wrong in the quiet of the night, like the sound of an old floorboard creaking, or a distant, faint engine rumbling. The next day, nothing happened. Larry thought about it for hours, maybe even days, but eventually, it faded from his thoughts as the ordinary world resumed its rhythm. He left the phone untouched on the table, wrapped in the blanket of forgetfulness that surrounded him in his small farmhouse. But on the 7th of November, at exactly midnight, a sound interrupted the silence. It was a soft, persistent ringing, a ghostly echo of KZMT's former life. Larry hesitated for only a moment before answering, though he had no idea what to say now. The voice on the other end sounded like a stranger, older and more serious. "Larry, this is Mike from KZMT," it said. I'm calling to inform you that your call was selected in our contest. But Larry didn't hear any of this as clearly as he would have liked, for his hand had already begun to shake, and there was a strange feeling in the air, a cold, dense chill that seemed to seep through the walls. In the background, he heard the static of an old radio. It cackled with faint interference, like ghost voices whispering into the night. The announcer's voice drifted through, but it was muffled and distant. We're sorry to say that KZMT went off the air in 1994 due to financial difficulties, but we hope you will continue to listen until midnight on the 7th of November, 2023. Larry felt a knot form in his throat as he stared into the darkness. The radio continued to broadcast with static and odd beeps. He heard snippets of old songs from another time, sung by voices that seemed to fade away. It was as if the very air around him was warping and shifting. Finally, the announcer's voice grew clearer. And now, for our midnight program, a special segment dedicated to our most loyal listeners who never gave up on us. We've been broadcasting secretly since 1994, waiting for just this moment. Larry tried to say something, but his words were caught in a knot of fear and anticipation. On the 7th of November, at exactly midnight, the voice continued. KZMT will be back, with all its old programs and hosts, and we will start broadcasting from the very same studio where it all began. Larry hung up, his mind racing. He stared at the phone as if he expected to see some sign of this strange, unexplained occurrence. The room was colder now, and the air seemed heavier, thick with the promise of something that wouldn't be. And then, from somewhere in the distance, a voice echoed through the silence. Stay tuned for Midnight Frequency. Larry sat frozen in his chair, holding the phone tightly as if it were his only connection to reality. The static on the radio grew louder, punctuated by distant whispers and unidentifiable sounds that made his skin crawl. The final beat was just beyond the horizon of understanding, a haunting whisper lingering in the air. Until next time, stay tuned for Midnight Frequency. The clock on the wall says 2:17 a.m. I sit alone at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee. Maybe it's time to head upstairs, get some sleep. But you know how it is, right? It's been 3 years since I moved back home after the incident in Florida. The late night calls start up again, those ghostly voices whispering over the airwaves. I should have left it alone. Late night listener, the voice crackles through the static Y radio and I turn the volume just a notch higher. I'm here. There's a pause. It's like the studio is clearing its throat after a cough. I heard your name on a Facebook group from back in high school, says the host, his voice low and steady. You're familiar with our show? The one about things that can't be explained? Yeah. A moment of silence stretches out. Then, a few years ago, I received some photographs. They are old family photos from your town, Charleston, South Carolina, and they seemed a little different than others I've seen before. My mind drifts back to the attic, where those yellowed prints still hang in glass frames. The house is quiet. Only my cat's soft purring breaks the night. The first photo shows our great-grandmother with your father and his siblings standing beside her. Continues the host. Nothing strange there, right? I remember those photos vividly, everyone grinning into the camera except the eldest child who looks a bit lost in the background. I nod, my eyes still on the radio. But then you noticed something peculiar while shuffling through old prints from other family events. You started noticing that the strangers in the pictures weren't there at all. Their faces, clothes, they just faded away. My breath catches as I recall the first time I saw it. I was organizing an album of photos for a party when my eyes fell on one from 10 years ago. My mother stood with her 2 cousins, but something was off. Their faces looked like they were fading in and out, almost like they were being erased. Over time, you noticed this happening to more and more prints. The host presses on. First it was a few photos, then dozens. The strangers, faces of total strangers, all seemed to fade away bit by bit until nothing was left but your family. My heart sinks as I think back to that day at home. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even though everyone else in my immediate vicinity seemed unaware. The house felt colder than usual. But wait, says the host, there's more. Some of those faces started moving farther and farther away until they disappeared entirely. I run a hand through my hair, pulling at the strands. It's like someone is erasing me from these photographs as well, bit by bit, until there's just nothing left. They are fading away faster than you can replace them, concludes the host, his voice almost somber now. It's eerie, almost as if something or someone is actively trying to remove them. My phone buzzes in my pocket, startling me. It's a text from my sister saying she's coming over tomorrow for a visit. Can I ask you something? Continues the host. I hesitate. Should I keep this on hold? I've seen your name on various online forums discussing these kinds of phenomena, he says matter-of-factly. What do you think is happening? My fingers grip the phone tighter, knuckles turning white. The question hangs in the air like a threat. Are we dealing with something otherworldly here? I ask finally, my voice barely more than a whisper over the crackling line. The host pauses for what feels like an eternity before replying. That's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? I take another sip of the cold coffee. The room feels colder now. My breath clouds up in front of me. Good night, Mr. Thompson, I say quietly into the phone and disconnect. The dial tone rings back at me like a cruel reminder. The photographs fading one by one, and I'm left with nothing but questions. And that's where we'll close the lines for tonight. If you made it this far, if you're still here in the dark with me, then you're one of us now. The ones who listen after midnight. The ones who don't quite turn the radio all the way off. Before you go, do one thing. Subscribe, and turn on the bell. Every week we bring another lost night back from the static, and you don't want to miss the frequency when it opens again. Until then, keep a light on, check the locks, and if your phone rings after 3, and there's only static on the other end, you don't have to answer. This has been the Midnight Frequency. Good night, and sleep with the radio on.